remembering me, as they say. Thank you for remembering me. So welcome again. My name is Laura Baecher. I work in the MA TESOL program at Hunter College in New York State. We began with edTPA as one of the early adopters. And so we have some experience with it now, but some states are still new to it. Some of you on the phone may not really use it yet at all. So we are very lucky that Cathy is going to walk us through what TPA is. So whether you're very experienced or you're new, you'll be able to get a good grounding in what edTPA for our field looks like. And then we'll have some time to interact and share and ask any questions. So this is our first webinar in what we hope to be a series from the teacher education interest section of the TESOL International Association. All right, Cathy, I'll let you take it away. Thanks.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone, and I'm really excited to be here today. I am going to also introduce my colleague and the director, the national director for edTPA, Andrea Whitaker, who's on the phone, who's going to be with us today. I'm going to walk through the slides, but I want to give her a chance to welcome everybody, and she's going to also help with the Q&A session that we're going to take about 20 minutes and walk through some slides, and then together we'll field your questions. So Andrea, if you want to jump in and say a little bit before we get started. Did we lose Andrea? Okay, well, we might have lost her. Okay, well, if she joins back in.
Sorry about that. I had a momentary lapse in my audio.
Okay, there she is.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, yes.
I'm so sorry. I had a momentary lapse in my audio, and I'm in a bit of a noisy spot, but thank you, Cathy, for the introduction. I did want to welcome everybody today and let them know that edTPA is a support and assessment system now available in a number of states, including New York, and we welcome your questions and any further follow-up. You can always get answers in the edTPA online community, and Cathy will be showing you a slide with that web address. So I'm going to put myself back on mute, and I'll be listening in and can chime in on questions as needed.
Okay. Great, thanks, Andrea. All right, so we have about 50 minutes together, and so I put my timer on for 20 so that we can make it through these slides in that amount of time, and then open it up so you have lots of time for questions. I have additional slides if we want to get into a little bit more explicit look at some of the rubrics or some of the tasks. So I have those in addition if some questions come up later. But I have some initial slides that talk about and here we see some goals, kind of the overview of the edTPA structure and purpose first, and then looking more specifically at the English as an Additional Language Handbook. What is the subject-specific focus of that particular handbook for your community? We want to look a little bit at the EAL data from the last national biennial report. I think that will be interesting for you as a field to kind of look at very briefly. Then we'll talk a little bit around the tasks and a couple of the rubrics if we get to that, or if you have questions about that. We want to make sure we have time to address your questions. And I also have some slides at the end about resources and supports that are available to the community. When Andrea said it's an assessment and a support system, we take that pretty seriously here at Scale. So, all right, so let's move it on ahead. Andrea also said if we have to use the text and the question feature to ask you questions today, if we get any questions that are kind of outside the purview of what we really want to focus on today, we're going to ask you to put those on the online community, or if we don't get to any of your questions, if after our 50 minutes together today, a question comes up, feel free to post it there and you'll definitely get a response. Okay, so first, we're going to talk a little about the structure and the purpose of edTPA overall. So who's involved in this edTPA process? There's really three partners. SCALE, which is the Stanford Center for Assessment, Learning, and Equity. That's where both Andrea and I work, and a lot of folks from the field help and work in the development of the edTPA as well. And then we have both AACTE as one of our partners, and then Pearson is one of our partners. So each of us have very different roles within this partnership of both developing and implementing edTPA across a of states and programs. Scale is actually in the intellectual partner behind the edTPA. We're in charge of developing the handbooks. We're involved in developing the training, the curriculum, the resources, everything that has to do with kind of the intellectual work of edTPA. We're in charge of facilitating that and recruiting people to help with that process from the profession. So the handbook teams and the trainers and the supervisors, tapping a lot of folks from out in the field to really help with that process. AACTE is a kind of our partner in terms of the educational partner that helps with communicating things to the field, sending out our e-blasts. They also post a lot of our resources, webinars on the website. We have our edTPA website there, and a lot of our online community questions and online community professional development networking happens at the AACTE website. So we're really a professional learning community with our AACTE partners. And then Pearson is really our technological partner. In order to take edTPA to scale, in order to score edTPA on a platform, in order for candidates across the nation to submit and programs and candidates to get their scores back, we needed a partner, a technological partner, and so Pearson plays that role in our kind of triad partnership. So that's who is involved in the edTPA process. Okay, so Andrea already talked about edTPA being, ooh, this likes to get a little, guess I hit that too hard. All right, so Andrea already talked about edTPA being a support and assessment system. That's what makes, as a performance assessment, makes edTPA a little different than some other assessments that are out there. It was actually designed to be both a support system and an assessment system, and it was designed to really be educative in terms of being student-centered and a part of a multiple measure assessment system. And we really talk a lot about the fact that it was developed by the profession and for the profession. So we facilitate the development of the handbooks with handbook teams of experts, pulling from both teacher ed, from professional organizations, from the field, from the P12 field, to really make sure that we're gaining a lot of input from the field and feedback from the field in an ongoing way to make sure that it is relevant and makes sense for each subject area. And I just want to talk a little bit about this notion of it being educative. First off, just as a performance, just the basic principles of performance assessment in and of itself is, in terms of the quality criteria we use in designing performance assessments, is they're meant to be a learning experience for candidates as they complete them. So as candidates complete the edTPA, they're learning as they're doing it, and they're also learning from the results of it. And it's also meant to be, as a performance assessment, embedded in a program. So it's a part of the curriculum, both formatively and summatively. So programs also, if they choose to approach it in an educative way, can learn about their programs as they're preparing candidates to do this, and also learn from the results in both a quantitative and qualitative way to bring back into and improve their programs. So it's designed to be educative if programs approach it that way. Okay, moving on. So in terms of edTPA being a part of a multiple measures assessment system, it's really designed to be that capstone or summative piece of an assessment system in an educator preparation program. So within that program, teacher educators will have formative assessments and coursework assignments that they've designed. They'll have evaluation and observation feedback done in the field and in student teaching. And then they may have some basic skills or subject matter assessments that take place along the way. And then near the end of the program, within the field during student teaching, that's when the edTPA is to be implemented. And you can see that capstone event, that performance assessment of edTPA, is an integration of planning, instruction, assessment, analysis of teaching, and academic language. It's really talking about the cycle of teaching and putting kind of everything together near the end of the program. So it's not edTPA measures everything. It's more that edTPA is evaluating a teacher's candidate's readiness to teach near the end of the program. So being that summative assessment, in terms of edTPA across all content areas, it has a common architecture across those 27 fields. And yes, we have 27 handbooks, and they all are aligned to the licenses that states have for content areas for teachers, for new beginning teachers. Each handbook is subject specific, but each handbook is based on a learning segment of 3 to 5 lessons or 3 to 5 hours of instruction that is continual or consecutive. And candidates are to base their plans on the context of where they're teaching, their field placement, and also the knowledge that the students bring, both the prior academic knowledge that the students bring, and also those students' background, personal and cultural and community and linguistic backgrounds. So altogether, it's a portfolio of artifacts authentic artifacts that teachers would develop for their students, and then commentaries where candidates have an opportunity to explain the rationale and thinking behind some of those teaching artifacts. Okay, so this kind of gives you a sense of the authentic evidence of practice that candidates are asked to submit, develop and submit as a part of their edTPA portfolio. And it's based on 3 tasks: a planning task, an instruction task, and an assessment task. So your planning task, which is the first, is task 1, and that's the intended teaching. What are they planning or intending to teach? And for planning, they submit an instructional and social context. It's called the context for learning, where they describe and explain information about their classroom, their grade level, their students, and some background knowledge about that. They also write lesson plans and submit their lesson plans. Then their instructional materials and assessments and assignments that go along with those lesson plans. And then finally, they have a planning commentary that explains some of the things that go along with those lesson plans. And that's the planning task. It's what they intended to plan. They haven't implemented it yet. It's just the competency in planning, so to speak. Task 2 is an instruction. And here, the major pieces of evidence are unedited video clips of their enacted teaching. Now they're taking those plans and actually teaching them, implementing them. And depending on the handbook, it might be 1 clip that's 15 or 20 minutes, or it might be 2 clips of no more than 10 minutes. And each handbook says exactly what those clips should include. And then they have an instruction commentary that gives some information or explains some of the things that might be happening in those video clips that a scorer might not know because they're not in the classroom. It gives a candidate an opportunity to kind of explain some of the things that are happening in the clip. That's instruction. That's the enacted teaching. Then we go to the 3rd task, which is the assessment task. And here it's the impact of the teaching on the learners, on the learning. And in task 3, the candidates choose 1 assessment for the whole class. They analyze that assessment for the whole class. They hand in the analysis of that learning for 3 focus students who they choose that show a pattern of learning across the class. And they give feedback have to give concrete feedback to those 3 focus students. They can give it in writing, or they can give it orally, or they can give it visually. But they have to show concrete evidence. So it either has to be written, it has to be recorded, or it has to be video recorded and submitted. And then again, they have an assessment commentary where they explain some of the analysis, they explain some of the feedback. Academic language comes in at this as too. They provide some evidence of language development, and that's your assessment task. If you look underneath, analysis of teaching effectiveness and academic language development happens across the 3 tasks instead of in one place, and that's measured by rubrics that go across. So that's the whole cycle of teaching, as it were, that happens: planning, then instructing, then assessing, and then analyzing that and looking at language supports and development across that cycle of teaching. Okay, I want to tell you a little bit about, let's see how my time's going here. We may skip this a little. Oh, We've got about 7 minutes. Okay, so a little bit about the rubric blueprint. It is a 5-level rubric, and each rubric follows this same sort of level in terms of performance. We have a title, we have a guiding question in every rubric, and that level 3 on the rubric represents the knowledge and skills of a candidate who is qualified to teach. When you go up to the level 4 and level 5, you pick up in terms of a candidate who has more solid foundation of knowledge and skills for a beginning teacher, and level 5 really goes up to a more advanced level of skills and ability of a candidate who's very qualified to teach. But this is based on the end of a program candidate. When we go below that level 3, we start to see a candidate who's got some gaps or who's starting to struggle in some ways. So at that level 2, we have a candidate who has the knowledge and skills of a candidate who's possibly ready to teach, has got some things going on that are okay and some things that might have some gaps. But at that level 1, we see somebody who's seriously struggling, is not yet ready to teach. So that's our rubric blueprint. And then we have this rubric progression, where you're seeing across, if you look at across the rubrics, you'll see this from that level 1 who's not ready, that level 3 in the beginning, an early beginner, to that highly accomplished beginning teacher at the level 5. And our rubrics kind of have some patterns, where at that lower level of the rubrics, we're seeing candidates who are more teacher focused, and at the higher level of the rubrics, we see them starting to really focus on the student, on the learner, and how are they attending to and addressing and analyzing the needs of the learner and then attending to that. The same thing with this whole class focus to more differentiation for groups or individuals happening along that continuum. And the bottom, we look at plans and activities that are more fragmented or indiscriminate and loosely connected on the bottom continuum, more at the lower ends of the rubric, moving up to very intentional, very integrated, well-executed plans or assessments that happen at the higher end of the rubric. So you can really see how things get more sophisticated. There's a deepening of rationale. Skills and strategies really expand near that higher end of the rubric as our candidates become more sophisticated and more highly accomplished. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about the EAL handbook in terms of its subject-specific focus. I'm going to return us to, this is a graphic from the handbook. It's a nice graphic to share with candidates and to share with faculty who are seeing the handbook for the first time. It lays out this cycle. It's a nice visual of the cycle of teaching and how student learning is really at the center of everything in the edTPA handbook. The planning, the instruction, the assessment all revolves around making sure that student learning is at the center. And then you have academic language development kind of hugging and reflecting and justifying and analyzing, teaching, hugging everything else. And we want to make sure that everything that we're doing is continually being, as a teacher, we continually analyze what we do in order to improve it, and we continue to integrate language development and supporting language development all the way through everything we do as well. So this is the architecture and the goals of every single handbook. What changes is the subject-specific focus. So each handbook has its own sort of central content knowledge, a knowledge and skills that they think are the most central for their handbook in terms of teachers to make sure students learn. So for example, in history, it's facts and concepts, analyzing and interpreting and developing arguments and conclusions. In math, it's procedural knowledge, problem solving, conceptual understanding, those sorts of things. So for our EAL handbook, and this is taken straight out of the handbook at the very beginning, I've just chopped some excerpts out and kind of shortened it so we could see some chunks of it. It's this. So we're planning 3 to 5 consecutive lessons. In EAL, I've shortened that in English as an additional language. And if they're teaching within a larger time block, it can go from 3 to 8 hours of connected instruction. And we refer to that as a learning segment. So when you see that something is underlined with some dots like that, it means that if you roll over that in the handbook, you'll get a gloss. That language is in the glossary, that term is in the glossary, and if you roll over it, you'll get the glossary definition. That's just why that's there. Consistent with the recommendations of TESOL for EL professionals, a learning segment should support students' English language proficiency or development within meaningful content instruction. That, if I could, oops, sorry, I was trying to highlight on, I guess Zoom won't let me highlight on my PowerPoint. That is the key for the content focus in EAL, supporting students' English language development within meaningful content-based instruction. So here, the learning segment should demonstrate your ability to plan for, implement, and assess students' English language development within content-based instruction, which includes developing students, and I put the pieces in red, their demand of language functions and language competencies through 2 or more of the following modalities: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So we've got kind of 2 things happening: English language development with content-based instruction, and developing students' command of language functions and language competencies through the modalities, 2 or more of the modalities. And we're going to go down now and actually look at the language competencies. And these are language competencies: grammatical competence, discourse competence, pragmatic competence, and metalinguistic competence. And each one of them is defined. And again, you'll see that they're dotted underneath because they're in the glossary, and there's examples in some of these as well. So that is our subject-specific focus within EAL. So I'm going to just pause there and see if there's any questions on that. Did any questions, Laura, come up? Not yet? Okay. So let's look at some edTPA data, because I'm about good. All right, so this is actually from the executive report and the biannual report, excuse me, that comes out twice a year. And you can see it gets reported to programs that are participating every year. It's the national data, and then programs actually get their own data. So if they want to compare it to the national data, they certainly can do that. So from July, this is the most recent data set actually, from last July until December. So if you look at, it tells you how many submissions there were, RN, across the nation for each, for all the handbooks. So there were 9,500 almost for all the handbooks. And then it breaks it down by handbook. And then it tells you what the total score was across all of the rubrics. For the handbooks that have 15 rubrics, almost all of them have 15 rubrics, except for classical language and world language, where the 2 academic language rubrics are not in those handbooks, because everything is about language development in those 2 handbooks. And then it tells you the mean score by rubric. So if you look at English as an additional language here and compare their mean score to the rest of them here, and I have the last 6 handbooks on the next page, you can see that nationally, English as an additional language is doing quite well in the last round compared to the other fields. 47.4 is one of the high, except next to business education, which had a pretty small in there, is a very high total mean score. And I was very interested in the academic language rubrics, which is 4 and 14, and it has the highest by far, 3.5. Everybody else is at a 3 or a 2.8 or a 2.5, which is not surprising to me. It should, that is an area of some expertise, but it's nice to see that. And when we look at 14, which is the second academic language rubric, we also see that as a 3.0, and everybody else is below 3. So it's just interesting to look at that data. You may make this PowerPoint available for folks if they want to look at that data more closely. But it's nice to see that English as an additional language is doing has some strengths nationally. So programs can look at their data more closely and see which rubrics they might want to, do some more work on, and then to look at it qualitatively to really see. That's when you really get to see how are our candidates actually making sense of some of these constructs. That's always powerful, but it's nice to just see that data kind of in a broad sense. And if we look at the next page, you'll see some more handbooks, but you'll see the same thing: 42, 40, 39, 38. And again, we don't see only one or two groups above 3 for 4, and the same at 14. Everybody's below 3 here at 14. So, okay. So this is my last slide I'm going to go over, and then we'll open it for questions. And if we don't have a lot of questions, we'll actually go and look at the tasks and some of the rubrics. I just want to say a few notes about task 2, which is the instructing and engaging students task. That's the instruction task where they actually include the videos. For the EL handbook, it's required that there are 2 video clips submitted, and they are to be each no more than 10 minutes, and those clips are to be consecutive. There are not to be no breaks in the clips. There's just a couple of things required for the EAL candidates that I think it's important to note. These are all in the handbook, but I thought it would be wise to bring them out and just, I think these questions come up a lot for EAL candidates. So the minimum is lower for EAL than other areas because it's necessary for your field. It's authentic for your field. So a minimum of 3 students is allowed in the EAL candidate in EAL videoing. Come on, Cathy. EL candidates are allowed to have a minimum of 3 students. In other fields, it's not that small, except for special ed. And there's a caveat there. There's a little footnote that says, if for some reason a place has less than 5 students overall, and the video needs to have less than 3, then they have to provide a rationale for that. Because we've had 1 or 2 cases. Doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while, EAL candidate is placed in a placement that only has 3 students, and 1 or 2, can only be videotaped. So we hope that doesn't happen very often, but just in case it does, there's a caveat there to support your candidates. So just it's good to know that because that's in the footnote. Also, the clips may include interactions in both English, the home language of the students, or they may be bilingual or multilingual interactions, because we know that's very authentic, again, to EAL classrooms. So to the context where EAL teachers, and candidates work. And if languages other than English are used, or when they're used, translations of the whole clips are not necessary. It's only when there might be an interaction between a candidate and a student, or between students, that a candidate thinks it's important for a scorer to hear, that they would translate that piece and put it in the commentary, because it might be evidence that they want a scorer to make sure that they heard, that goes along with the rubric, so to speak. So, and they just place that in the commentary. So I think those are some important notes that are all in the handbook for the candidates and the programs to see, but it's nice to kind of highlight them. Okay, so with that in mind, I thought we'd stop right here and ask some questions. I'm putting the website back up for the online community, and we'll see if we have questions. If not, I'll share some rubrics, some specific rubrics that have subject-specific emphasis from the tasks.
Okay. Thank you, Cathy. I actually unmuted everybody temporarily.
I'm trying to multitask.
Okay.
Okay,
did remain muted.
On task.
Actually, let me not do it that way.
Not all of them yet.
I'm remuting you because there was too much noise. Okay. If you want to ask a question, try raising your hand and I will unmute you. Or if you're having trouble finding where to locate the hand raising, you can post a question in the chat area. So we'll give everybody a chance to ask a question. I have a couple, but they're a little more grandiose, so I'm going to wait and let people start to try to raise their hands and ask questions first. Okay, so I see one question in the chat area. So Cathy, you probably can see it as well. And you just want to unmute yourself. I'll unmute you. So the question is, do students get some guidelines for the commentaries?
Do students get guidelines for the comment? Oh, okay, now I see it. There are not guidelines for the commentaries per se, but we do, and then Andrea wants to make a comment as well. We do have resources, and at the end of the PowerPoint, I have listed resources that are online for candidates, and one of them is called Making Good Choices. And and it's written for candidates, and within Making Good Choices, there are all sorts of tips and guidelines to help candidates with the whole portfolio submission process, including how to attend to commentaries, not what to write in the commentaries explicitly in terms of content, but how best to answer the commentaries in a larger way, like what is being looked for in terms of some general guidance. Andrea, do you want to add to that?
Need to unmute me.
There you go.
Oh, great. Thank you for unmuting me. Yes, but people should also understand that the commentaries are not a blank slate. Each commentary is offered in a template with a series of questions or a series of prompts that candidates reply to that give them an opportunity to explain other artifacts in the portfolio, explain sources of evidence, analyze sources of evidence, as Cathy listed out what's included in each tab. So the commentaries are not a blank slate. They are actually, candidates are prompted to provide certain kinds of evidence in relation to those artifacts.
Right. So for example, on the feedback prompt, it says, what feedback did you give your 3 SOCA students that focused on their strengths and their needs in relation to the objectives or something, that were assessed, something like that. So they're pretty, they're pretty straightforward in terms of the artifacts that they're handing in.
Okay. Yeah.
There's also, I know there's also something out there. We have 2 different kinds of supports that are listed on the AACTE website. The ones that are scale made that we've developed, and then people have also started to post some that are developed by programs that scale has not really reviewed and vetted. And I know that there's one, isn't there one, Andrea, that folks have used to help scaffold some of the writing of the commentaries, and I can't remember what it's called, but
yes.
I know programs have
yes.
found that helpful. So
yes, those are called the thinking organizers, and they were developed by Elisa Palmer and some of her team at Illinois State University, and they help candidates to unpack those prompts, and they are intended actually for a formative purpose in earlier assignments, not as as a how-to for their actual submission. Although I think some candidates have probably reviewed them again as a way of planning out their writing.
thanks, Andrea.
There was a question from Green who raised their hand, but they typed it in here.
Okay.
And then there's one from Chris. So we'll start with Green, which is a little further down. In the state of Washington, the ESOL endorsement is a secondary endorsement. This means you must already have an elementary or secondary certificate. ESOL endorsement candidates don't need EAL edTPA. They only need to do it in the initial certification area. Do you see that changing?
I think that's.
Do you want me to?
Go ahead, Andrea. I think that's very similar.
Yeah.
The answer is similar to California, I would think.
Well, you're absolutely right. In Washington, ESL or ESOL is an endorsement after the fact, and edTPA was designed to be used in initial licensure areas. So that's been Washington's decision. I don't think that there is any current conversation about changing that policy, but it is an interesting question, particularly for candidates who are preparing to teach in bilingual contexts. And we are having some conversations with other states about how to engage in some form of assessment that is particular to bilingual classrooms, which I know are often quite different than ESOL.
And then I know that Chris asked a question about.
Can we just add to that though?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
In New York State, ESL exists as an initial and as an add-on. So obviously the folks who get the add-on are in the same situation. And I know it's a state, the state only requires it for the initial, but because our folks who do get the add-on endorsement still have to participate in a supervised practicum, we've embedded the same activities into the practicum. So they're actually going through edTPA, but not for state certification. It's just at the program level, because we did feel that that was really important for content area teachers to also be able to display these skills since they are getting the certification. So that's just a thought or a suggestion for a way to build out that experience of activities into the practicum that folks take for the add-on. So I just wanted to share that.
That's a great affirmation, Laura, of the usefulness of edTPA as an assessment. That even though it's not a requirement by New York State, you're finding value in it for those who are adding the endorsement. So thank you.
Yes. I don't know if they thank me, the students. The other question was, some of my successful candidates have gotten their scores back, but without any commentary, just a raw score. Is there a plan to provide feedback?
Kathy, you want me to answer that too?
Yeah, either one of us can do that. That's a simple response, but you can go ahead. I can add if you want.
Yeah, well, we don't have plans to add beyond the scores, but in the score report, in addition to the scores, there is rubric language that represents the score that has been assigned for every rubric, so candidates have that as reference. In order to provide qualitative feedback to every candidate on every rubric in every field, it would increase the scoring time, it would increase costs for the assessment, and it would require a whole nother layer of training. We also encourage programs to review the portfolios with candidates through a local evaluation protocol we have offered, and we also encourage candidates to use another resource called Understanding Rubric Level Progression as a way of interpreting their own scores.
Mm-hmm.
Was that comprehensive, Kathy, or do you have?
Oh no, that's
addition?
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah.
Let's hear some other thoughts, questions. If you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you. If you want to share thought, concern, idea, or you can just type in the chat area, whatever you feel comfortable with. We have these ladies on the line. We have our staff.
Yeah, Laura,
Yeah.
while you're soliciting more questions, I do want to make a comment because it's an interesting one that I heard recently in a state that somehow using edTPA means that you have to adopt a Stanford teacher preparation curriculum. And I just want to be very clear with people that edTPA is designed to measure 15 very specific high leverage teaching behaviors. And the route to get those practiced and measured formatively and for candidates to be ready to teach is clearly up to the campus itself. So there's not any set curriculum. We don't want people to think that they have to throw out all of the good stuff they're doing. edTPA is measuring 15 things. We think there are 15 things that are very important to effective teaching, and our validity studies and our work to date has demonstrated that these are 15 important aspects of teaching, nicely aligned with Charlotte Danielson's framework, with the INTAS standards, and with CAPE expectations. But it's certainly not expected that it replaces the good thinking and curriculum and other measures already in place in programs.
And we've also found that many of those things are already in programs in addition to that. So.
I thought people would be like, beating down the door here. I'm not seeing any other questions. Folks, don't be shy. Okay, here's one. And then, because I always have a couple. All right, how specific is the evidence that you're looking for in the questions that ask about eliciting student responses? Do you want actual student/teacher quotes of that elicitation response or just a summary?
Is that, okay, Gwendolyn, is that about the instruction rubric when you're talking about rubric 8 for eliciting student responses?
Hold on, Gwendolyn, I'm unmuting you. Okay, you should be good.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking about.
Okay, well, let's pull that rubric up and look at it, and then we'll see because do I have rubric 8? Oh, I don't, but you know what? I can pull it up. Just let me, well, actually, yeah, it'd be nice for people to look at that. So let me escape maybe we can answer the other question while I'm doing that. Could you ask that one and have
What measures have colleges taken to revise or adjust their curriculum to meet the demands of edTPA? And that's going to be, I think, a question more to the other folks here. Some things. Does anybody have something they want to share about how how the preparation curriculum has changed in order to meet the demands of edTPA? You can raise your hand. I can unmute you. Tabitha, what about you? Let's see. Anyone? So one of the things we've done at Hunter is we have 2 semesters of supervised teaching, and we have kind of organized them so that the first is really focused on the demands of edTPA, so it's really integrated with the first practicum, and we've made sure to familiarize people earlier, like in methods and curriculum. Tabitha, do you want to share something about what's going on at UMD?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
So at University of Maryland, I think we found we didn't really need to change all that much. Like, as Cathy and Andrea said, really what we were already doing was pretty effective. We did kind of have to do a little bit of explaining about some of the edTPA language, especially explaining the competencies and the term modalities, whereas we had been more prone to use the 4 skill. So just kind of speaking about some of the language. But we've tried to incorporate practice tasks into some of our methods classes. So like in the literacy methods, we had them do a unit plan and do a practice, kind of a practice task 1, and a similar project in the assessment class. So we've been kind of integrating it into the first year of coursework, and then they do it in their practicum during their last semester.
That's great. I think probably if folks want to continue a little conversation offline later, I will make sure that anyone who wants to have their email shared, or we can continue a discussion on the teacher ed list as well. I think you want to go on, Cathy, with this piece of elaborating on student responses question.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Can you see the rubric?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for moving forward with the other question so I could get this rubric up. I didn't have this one in the PowerPoint. Okay, so this is rubric 8 from instruction, and it focuses on deepening students' English language development within content-based instruction in terms of eliciting responses to promote their language proficiency. And so if you look at that level 3, which is that ready to teach place, well, let me remind you that the primary source of evidence for candidates in instruction is the video clips. So one of the video clips is going to focus on how the candidates elicit students' responses. All right, so we're not looking at what they say in the commentary. We're looking at what they do in the video clips. This is their enacted teaching. So how are they actually doing things to prompt students to respond out loud, mainly? What kinds of questions are they asking, or what kinds of projects have they got them presenting, right? So that there's some evidence within the clips that they're addressing their English language proficiency with respect to one language competency and one modality. So it could be that they're speaking, it could be that they're writing. That's a little harder to show in a clip. So most likely, most of the clips you're going to see them most likely speaking in a way that is showing that they're developing some language proficiency in relation to some sort of language competency. That's at that level 3. As you go up the rubric, you're going to see that that the candidates not only eliciting those responses, but then how they're responding to the input they're getting, or the students actually using that language. They're doing it in a way that's building. They might be asking a question, providing some feedback, doing something to help them further that. And as they move down in the rubric, you're going to see that the kinds of questions they're asking are very low level, and they aren't they aren't thinking about the modalities, they aren't thinking about the language competency as much, and it really becomes a more superficial sort of facilitation of language use. So Gwendolyn, does that answer your response? Well, really, now in the commentary is where the explanation around what is happening occurs, any translation, if there's some multilinguistic interactions happening, the translation of some evidence that they want to make sure that the scorer understands in case the scorer is not, isn't a bilingual scorer. Some scores may be, but there might be 3 languages being spoken, and they might not, they might want to translate that so that that good evidence, what one of the kids said doesn't get lost.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That
You're
answers
welcome.
my question.
Great. I love this rubric. Any rubric that encourages student talk and student language development. So this is one of my favorite rubrics besides the academic language rubrics. So this ties into that for me. So
That's great.
Yeah.
There's one other question about whether there's a repository anywhere of exemplary portfolios, and maybe you can touch on how states have worked around or struggled with rules about video. I know in New York we've gone around and around this question, so maybe you can help people at universities figure out how to either access or preserve, or what's the policy.
Okay, I can start with that, and then Andrea can jump in. I'm trying to get back to my PowerPoint, but we'll just do that. So we do, the examples that we have are part of the local evaluation process. So if your program or your region decides to go through the local evaluation process, we do have portfolios that we have gotten permission to use as a part of that process. That help you see candidate work and get really familiar with the rubrics in terms of going through that process. And we actually use local evaluation rubrics to go through that process. They go into a 3-bucket instead of a 5-level sort of, so you don't have to learn the distinctions between all 5 levels, which is more a official scoring kind of thing. But those are only used within that capacity. We encourage programs to gather, because it's very hard to get permission to use portfolios nationally because of the videotaping and privacy issues for both the candidate, but particularly for the children. Right. So that's a very difficult issue to in terms of getting permission to use them nationally. But for programs, whoever your vendor is, we encourage programs to start archiving your own and making sure that the permission slips that you have your candidates and your families sign has a caveat in there for being able to use the artifacts, the assessment artifacts, and the video clips for instructional, professional development, and possibly research purposes, so that you will start to be able to use your own portfolios, not only for local evaluation purposes, but for instructional purposes and possibly for research purposes. So I know when I was at San Diego State and we did this, that we had our candidates and we had our permission slips that went out to families have both of those things. Yes, we'll allow the videotapes to be used for these purposes. Yes, we'll allow the assessments to be used for these purposes, or no, we won't. So it was kind of like a 3-tiered permission slip when they signed. And we actually had them sign it at the beginning of the year because we had them do embedded signature assessments that we wanted to, that were done in the field. And then we had the candidates sign for that, and we had them kind of sign something for formative assessments that might involve video clips that we wanted to be able to use. And so once your faculty has their hands on those, they can be used for all sorts of reasons. So, and then if you have a vendor, you can hold on to those, and they're archived in your program for as long as you want them, and you can choose your own exemplars. So.
Yeah, and Cathy, just to add just a little bit of wraparound for people, when Cathy refers to a vendor, she's talking about the electronic portfolio or program management systems like TaskStream and LiveText, Chalk and Wire. There are about a dozen now that interface with the edTPA portfolio submission platform hosted by Pearson, so that programs, you know, if you're already using one of those portfolio vendors, then you can, as Cathy said, archive, store, and so on, and candidates can use that platform to upload into the Pearson submission system so that their materials can be accurately scored. So that's what the vendors are for. And then going back to the local evaluation samples, I'd just like to put a plea out there to the TESOL community and the EAL community that if you do have appropriate permissions for your candidates' portfolios to be used for local evaluation outside of your own campus, we would love to have some samples. Because currently, Cathy, I believe we don't have one from EAL.
Nope, we do not.
Yeah. So if
yeah.
and I know that there's been a firewall around that in New York. We haven't been able to scoop up any in New York, but for other states on the line, if you have some solid performances now or you have some in the future, we would really love to work with you to make sure you have the appropriate permissions so that we could use them. It's a real need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's something I can't help you with, like you said in New York. We have some good ones, but just as a
oh wait, what?
Yeah.
Laura, one more thing,
Yeah.
because people, there's a real danger with the internet. We see regularly. I do a Google search every day for edTPA, and there are constantly samples of edTPA performance out there in the universe. Sometimes they're on the wrong templates. Sometimes who knows who has constructed them. Please, please, please caution your candidates not to purchase anything on the internet and to be very, very mindful of support websites that could be taking their money or providing them with inaccurate, inappropriate information. And if you happen to find edTPA materials out there in the universe that you think are suspicious, please email us because we can ask certain vendors to do a cease and desist or private private websites. There is one in Washington that I know gets a lot of traction. It's called Pass edTPA, and in the ways that we have reviewed it over time, it consistently has inaccurate or out-of-date information. So please warn your candidates not to think that they can just Google it and have what they need. Your program is their best preparation and the resources that we make available in the edtpa.aacte.org resource library.
Okay, that's good advice for students. We just have a couple minutes left. I wanted to just ask a couple of my questions, I guess, that I've talked with other people about. One is, in what way could we work with you to follow up on candidates who did well, let's say, on edTPA in EAL and who are in the field to do some kind of validation work? Because of course we're a smaller area, and we'd like to know the relationship between the exam and the preparation they got in their programs to the work that they're doing later on. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
We would love to support that kind of study. And unfortunately, we don't have, Scale does not have access to identifiable candidate data. Everything is what they say psychometrically dummy coded. So when we do our analyses for our administrative reports and any other reliability and validity analyses we're doing, we don't have candidate identifying information. Mm-hmm. Laura, I think the best bet would be to work with your partners in your organization and see if we can't identify campuses that are willing to participate in this study and help them to identify a tracking mechanism, a way to follow them into the field. These are the kinds of predictive and consequential validity studies that we're very eager to do. We do have 2 states, Washington and Georgia, where we are able to have the infrastructure to do this kind of tracking, but it's more general. It's not as specific by field in this way. This is a study that's waiting to happen, and I hope we can do it together.
Well, we want to invite you to TESOL's annual conference. Is actually going to be in Washington State next March in Seattle. So maybe we can join together and some interested campuses can start to talk about it, because now that I do have folks who are now out in the field, and it would be an interesting just loop, even if it's small scale, going forward. And I just wanted to open it up one last time if there's any last questions from anybody. You can stick them in the chat box. We can see if your hand is raised. This was really interesting and really, I think, helpful to a lot of people. We're going to be posting this video with Cathy and Andrea's permission to the TESOL website, so folks who couldn't come in at this time can listen and learn a little more about what edTPA is. And I just want to thank Cathy, Andrea, and Xiao and Hunter for helping run this. And I will be available, obviously, by email. Anyone feel free to email me more thoughts, questions, etc. And look for our next upcoming webinars from the teacher education intersection of TESOL. And have a good day.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Laura. Thanks so much, Laura.
Okay,
Bye,
bye-bye.
everybody.